either. And then you see these narratives that are being pushed, as I say, by these different psyops, these memes that are being created, seemingly by. I mean, it's hard to say, isn't it, whether how much of it's actually being consciously directed, and how much is just organically emerging into consensus reality
Yeah,
through.
I think just to pick up on that point, I've been on kind of different podcast and radio shows from, quite mainstream things to, real fringe things. And I always do emphasize the point that there is a dark force at work, and there are people who work for that dark force. And, I kind of put out a little piece a while back called Demystifying Illuminist Power Structures. And I think, like yourself, I tend to steer away from the use of the word Illuminati or New World Order, but nevertheless, the Illuminist Masonic method, in terms of its stratification of knowledge and its extraordinary systems of hierarchy and initiation, which is very occultic. Not that that's anything to be afraid of, but it's unusual that that survives in any modern context.
Mm.
These things are real and they can be studied and they are there. There's no question about it. And I think it's very, very important to acknowledge that. For one thing, it shows you that you can release the burden of worrying about politics and worrying about Obama and Brown and Sarkozy and all the rest of them, because it's completely and totally and absolutely irrelevant. And that's a burden gone. And
Mm.
anybody who is laboring under the misapprehension that there's a space and there's an opportunity for radical politics to bring back, the way things used to be, has missed the game, because it doesn't function like that, and it never ever has done. And this
Right.
myth of a golden era is just another conjuration. It's a clever control system technique to associate and bind happiness with what has gone by, with a bygone era, whereas happiness can only ever and will only ever be experienced in the present moment, in the conscious present moment.
But don't you think there's a sort of archetypal resonance in that? I was talking about the ego again, that there was a pre-ego state, or a time before the intellect had hardened, where we were in harmony with nature. Okay, I'm not saying we can go back to that. That clearly we're moving forward, and there's no way to turn around. We've just got to go through whatever we're in now and get to what's on the other side. But don't you think that there's
Yes,
something?
I do, absolutely. I think I'll tell you what a fantastic exploration of this is, which is going to be a surprise for some people, but not for others, is Doris Lessing's book Shikasta.
Hmm.
Um, this was brought to my attention by an ex-colleague of mine, actually, who isn't necessarily into this kind of stuff. It's a very intelligent woman, and she said, "You need to check this out. It's a really interesting book." And Doris Lessing is a very talented writer, and the way she describes Earth, it's a science fiction novel, which is kind of unusual for one of five in a series. She describes essentially what is uh, can be divided into two polarities. One is the pre-Atlantean world, and one is the post-Atlantean world. And I would say, for shorthand, and we can investigate this as deeply as we want, but let's say for now, for shorthand, the natural state of the human being is pre-Atlantean. The unnatural manipulation of the human being is everything post-Atlantis. And if you don't like the word Atlantis, just use ancient civilization that was successful before anything that's in the history books, because there were them, they were there. They're obviously in evidence now, and all these kind of out of place artifacts that keep showing up, and this great technology to move and divide stone and so on and so forth is beyond man's abilities today. So we can say that there was a great civilization, and when that fell, it seems that the ego became ascendant, and following that, everything else just fell into the manipulation. And it was that way from day one. So nobody who's around today or has been around for a few thousand years has known any different.
Right. Are you familiar with Rudolf Steiner's work?
Yes, I am very, very familiar. He's one of the good guys.
For sure, yeah, and because he talks about Ahriman and Ahriman's influence coming fully into play in the Atlantean epoch, and that was I guess, the
Yep.
beginning of the end for the Atlanteans. And so, yeah, our civilization, and Ahriman again, it relates to the intellect. So that separation, what binds us into the physical, but separates us from the divine.
Yeah, and absolutely, and he was an incredible kind of before his time guy. He's kind of like he's a kind of like a mystical version of Wilhelm Reich to some extent, in that he was obviously way ahead of his time, and as soon as they spotted him, they were kind of discrediting him.
Mm,
But he was so prolific that these works just kept popping out, and I think he was the first one who introduced me to the idea of multidimensionality. And I can't remember the name of the damn book. Perhaps if it was next to me, but it isn't. There's one of his books where he deals with the presence of non-human entities existing in the same space as us. And when I first came across this, and he's talking about gnomes and all kinds of crazy shit.
right.
And when I first came across this, I hadn't done any of the legwork. I just thought, this guy has been so down the line and so cool and so articulate. What is he talking about gnomes for?
Mm,
Now, after another 20 years of study, going back to it, what he's saying is absolutely fascinating and absolutely bang on. And his whole ability to deal with questions of, you know, alternative history at such a time, in the sort of 20th century was just stunning. Not to mention all his sort of educational work and stuff. So yeah, a real Renaissance man.
yeah, there's definitely some keys in there which have not been used, or we're just waiting to be tapped. A lot of that stuff that he provided.
Well, I think he was one of the first people to document what McKenna called the machine elves, and Steiner called them the gnomes, and he'd obviously seen them, and he'd experienced them, and he'd seen their joy, and he'd felt their presence, and he kind of wrapped it up in a sort of mythical, archaic structure. But I think what he was really doing was encoding the fact that actually these were personal felt experiences that he's had,
Mm,
and anyone who has, in the vaguest sense, shared them instantly recognizes those little motifs and characteristics. And as I say, when I first read that book, I wasn't ready for it, and I kind of just thought, oh dear, dear, what's happened to this fella? But going back again, and it's the jetpack and the mountain. I think I'll have to write a book called that one day. Um, Having gone much further along the mountain track now, I can pick that book up again, and it's real gnosis, real heavy stuff, and it's excellent.
So I was doing a little diagram while we were talking here because we were talking about the global elite and this whole subject, which I know that so many of our listeners or our audience are not necessarily stuck on that, but it's just such a central strand. Who's running the show and what do they want? What's their intent and how's it going to intersect with uh, what's coming down the pike? To the 2012 thing and the shift of consciousness. In what ways are they going to try to co-opt this? Anyway, I was drawing a pyramid, and the standard sort of Ikean model is that the base of the pyramid is us, the mass, and then you've got the different groups and whatnot. But the pyramid I've drawn has the global elite as the base of the mass. So we're not even on the pyramid. We don't even exist in a sense. Yeah.
No, yeah, I have a pyramid of my own that's very similar to that, yeah.
Uh, and then the next level of the global elite, the geopolitics and all that, which is the visible and the hidden government, is what I call the old seers, which is a term taken from Castaneda.
Yeah.
And you cited
Hey, it's nice to
Castaneda.
come across someone who appreciates his work. Yeah, yeah.
Well,
There's not many of us around, although he's had a little resurgence in the last few years.
I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen because what he wrote was just too invaluable, and I think that the discrediting of Castaneda and his works, um, they were sort of compounded by his own fall from grace, and I think it was fitting that you mentioned the third enemy of the man of knowledge in this context, because I'm pretty sure that's what
Yes.
Castaneda fell prey to um, by
Yeah, he didn't manage
falling.
to make it to the old age.
No, well, no. He did die. He died of liver trouble, didn't he? Which would relate to
Yeah,
abuse
he
of
did.
power potentially. Um, but yeah, not to digress, but we could probably do a whole show about Castaneda sometime if you want, because
Yeah, yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, we'll have to come and do that sometime.
Yeah, it's I mean, people the tendency is throw out the baby with the bathwater, and the truths in those books are